given the opportunity to have this talk, I thought I should meditate and try and communicate with my higher self, see what sort of insights I get as to what I should talk about. And I did actually get a little voice in my head, and it told me to speak from my heart. Being the left type brain person that I am, I completely ignored that advice. And I spent quite a few weeks trying to figure out what I was going to talk about. And in the end, I poured myself a nice deep bath of research and I immersed myself in it. But after the fine example Carol gave yesterday, how speaking from the heart is the way to go, I'm not going to use my notes today. I'm going to try and listen to my higher self. So, as Jim said, my talk is on inner communication, vital for health and harmony. And I say it's vital for health and harmony because I don't think we're very aware on a physical level how disharmonious our organs, our hemispheres are in our typical state. When we wake up in the morning, we may thank the universe for being alive today. We may do a little bit of meditation, and that certainly goes a long way to bringing that into communication together. But why I say we have such a disharmonious internal balance is because our senses are, in a way, lying to us. Now I'm going to start. How many people here think we have 5 senses? That's typically what we're taught, isn't it? Does anyone think we have more senses? Yeah? How many do you think we have? Anybody? 6? 7? Yeah. Yeah, we don't really know how many we have. The number is greater every time we look. It's like when we try to measure a coastline for a country, the closer we look, the longer it gets. And it's the same with our senses. The closer we look, the more we have. When we look at, for instance, our sense of touch, that can be broken into temperature sensation, which is very different from pressure, very different from tickle and itch. When we look at our internal senses, we have a sense of balance. We don't often think, when we get up and walk, it just seems to work out. But there's actually a lot of sensory information going to the head. There's a lot of processing going on. And yeah, there's a lot that we sort of ignore. We focus on our 5 main senses. Here we live in cities, and to live in a city, the key is communication. We need to communicate with the lady in the drive-thru to get our meal. We need to communicate with our neighbours. Turn that music down, it's really annoying. And for communication, eyes and ears are the most important senses that we use. So we're very focused on those 2 senses here in the Western world. But in the Kalahari Desert in Africa, there's a tribe practicing a type of hunting known as endurance hunting. And it's supposedly the oldest form of hunting we know of. And this tribe, they spend 8 hours usually chasing one animal all across the plains. It's a very long process. And the sense that they use to do this, it's not their eyes, it's not their ears. I mean, they're involved, but that's not the key. The key for them is the hairs on the back of their hands. You see, in this tribe, they make sure that these hairs are sensitive to electromagnetic fields. And they hunt like this with this posture, and they're able to track where they can't see markings of the animal left behind. They're able to track its latent electromagnetic field with the sensitivity of the hairs on the back of the hand. And you've got to understand, this is Africa. There's not grapes growing on vines and orange trees. If you miss that prey that you've been running after for 8 hours, the tribe goes hungry. So it's very important to them that these little hairs are sensitive. So when I said earlier that our senses are lying to us, what do I mean by that? We've done, not me specifically, but people have done experiments where they put a VR headset, virtual reality goggles, and they put a camera on the front, and they delay the visual input to that person's brain by just a fraction of a second. And you can see the videos online, they're actually quite hilarious. the person with the goggles on, they become unable to locate themselves in rooms that they're familiar with. They can't crack an egg into a saucepan or anything. They become completely lost. And it's just a fraction of a second in delay of the visual system. But we already have an inbuilt delay in our visual system. It's 1/5 of a second. It takes for the light entering our eyes to go to the back of our head where it's processed by the primary visual cortex. And that 200 millisecond delay should mean that we can't drive cars, we can't catch balls, we shouldn't even be able to figure out where we are in relative space, but we do. So why is this? Well, the researchers who did these studies figured out that the reason we're able to do this is because we have an internal understanding of what the world around us should look like. We know how a ball should move through the air when it's thrown, and so when our eyes receive the signal, it knows in our head that the signal is delayed and it moves the ball for us. The image we see in our mind is just as much a product of our senses as it is our expectations of the world we see. So we're probably all familiar with children. They have this pretty common thing occur to them in their early ages where they see shadows, figures in their room. Little bear, I think my nephew says he sees in his room, is a bear in his cupboard, and a friend's child, little bats, groupings of bats in the corners fluttering away. And I myself as a child, my earliest memories, I can't remember anything before this, I must have been 2 or 3 years old, laying in bed, and I was just paralyzed with fear because I could see at least 24 bipedal lumbering shadows moving about my room and getting up to whatever they were doing. And what I was told from the person I trusted more than anyone in the world, my father, it's in your head. It's your imagination. And I believed him wholeheartedly. And of course it's my imagination, Dad said. And so as I grew up, I saw less and less of these kinds of things. And today, of course, I can look around at night and I see an empty room. But is that because there's nothing there? Or is that because I don't expect anything to be there? And that's what I'm trying to say. Our senses are giving us information, but we don't always trust it. We don't always believe it. It was just like Helen's talk last night. We build those grooves in our brain, in our mind, and that prevents us from seeing the real world around us. So, what other senses do we have? We talked about there was definitely more than 5. We can already identify maybe 7 to 9 off the top of our heads. But we also have a very sophisticated suite of internal senses. From our esophagus to our anus, I know not a very nice word, but it's medical. We have 100 million nerve cells which are acting, I think I called them in the title excitable cells. I do have that here. Yep. Excitable cells. And they're actually acting in a lot of ways like a brain. They're not close enough to a brain to be called a brain, but they're able to respond to stimulation in their environment and make decisions on their own. They can contract muscles. They can bring increased amounts of blood flow. They can release enzymes and even neurotransmitters. And we thought for a long time we have the vagus nerve, which communicates with the parasympathetic nervous system, which includes our organs that largely monitor themselves, heart, lungs, and gut. We thought for a long time that the brain, or the subconscious mind, the part that we're not aware of, is communicating with these organs, making sure that we're breathing and our heart is beating, because we don't have to think really hard. I've got to keep that dinner moving, or I've got to take that next breath. But when we finally got the ability to look at the vagus nerve and how the communication was occurring along it, we found that most of the information was coming from the body and going to the brain. It wasn't the other way around. Now there is information going back. There's a communication going on with our body and our mind. And it's this communication that really turned a lot of heads around in the scientific community and the medical researcher community, because they thought that that was impossible. This is our thinking organ. None of this does the thinking. So there was a lot of interesting research about the gut, but I honestly think that's child's play compared to what they found in the heart. 40,000 sensory neurites and supporting cells, very similar to what we see in a brain, incredibly close to the same structure. And that little brain in the heart, as they call it, it is in constant communication with our head. There's an institute called HeartMath. They're a very forward-thinking institute of medical researchers, and they've pioneered for at least 40 years now this understanding that we have a second brain in our body and we have a communication between the two. And what they found is that this communication can actually very easily be quantified with off-the-shelf medical equipment. They're able to take heart rate variability readings and convert that. I know this is mumbo jumbo, you don't have to pay attention to the specifics, but they convert that into a power spectrum density, which gives them a nice graph of how the heart rate is varying over time. And they found that when they look at that graph in an incoherent state, which is probably the state that most of us are in most of the time, there's little spikes all over the graph. That heart rate is changing constantly. But they found that there are some methods that bring about coherence between the heart and the brain, and when they measure that, they see one strong spike on that graph at 0.1 hertz, which is very low frequency. So what is the method that they have for communicating with the brain? And what are the benefits as well? We'll get onto the benefits afterwards, but the method we should go into first. So if I could invite you all with me to just do this. It's a very simple meditation technique. It's shown to turn on multiple portions of genetics and turn off other portions related with stress. The method's quite simple. It's as easy as putting your hand on your heart. And you do this in any way that's comfortable for you. 2 fingers, palm. You may want to put your hands like this. It's something that shamans, yogis, and all sorts of spiritual practitioners have done for a very long time. What happens when you put your hand on your heart is your awareness moves to your heart. Your awareness tends to move anywhere that you feel a physical sensation on your body. And with your hand on your heart, you're able to move your awareness down to it. That's the first step. The second step, just as simple. It's just consciously slowing the breathing down just a little bit. What this does is it triggers within your body a feeling of safety. When our bodies are out and about, like we force them to do every day, we're in a state of stress. We're in a state of fight or flight, and this pauses our body's internal ability to heal. But when you slow your breathing just a little bit, it tells your body you're safe, and that re-enables your inner healing abilities. So with the hand on the heart and the slower breathing, the last step is as simple as focusing on, and these are the 4 emotional states that they've found most beneficial: care, appreciation, gratitude, and compassion. One of those, a mixture of those, doesn't matter, but those 4 emotions are what triggers, now that you have this baseline, triggers this state of heart-brain coherence. So care for anyone or anything, compassion for anyone or anything, gratitude and appreciation. So I'm going to stop yabbering for just a second and just let everyone try and bring their awareness into their heart, slow their breathing, and focus on those emotions. It's nice and quiet in here. How does that feel? Does anyone feel a difference within themselves, a change? Nobody wants to open their eyes.
Because I've got my heartbeat slow down as well.
Yeah, that's a good sign. That's a good sign that your body's beginning to relax and it's beginning to communicate. What people have found when they do this simple practice, and again, this is medical research, they've they've found that you have increased cognitive abilities, increased creativity, and increased intuition. They've also found that this, along with things like deep prayer and deep meditation, it triggers 1,300 biochemical reactions in the body, some of them related with anti-aging. It's quite a profound physiological, detectable effect by that simple inner coherence that brings about. So that's one way we can bring about a communication within our body. There are a couple of others I want to talk about today. The second one is called Hemisync. Does anyone here know what Hemisync is? Sorry?
No.
Hemisync, the hemispheres of the mind. Typically these are unsynchronized. They're in communication, but it's, again, erratic, incoherent. We have the left side of our brain, which is our inner narrative. This is where the personality, the little voice that tells us who we are, that's where that lives. On the right side of our brain, we have the pleasure and pain centers. We have our motor control. We have all sorts of control over our body in that part of our brain. But that's not typically who we are. We're typically over here. And when we want to do something with the right-hand side of our brain, we have to ask it. We have to receive the stimulation from the world around us. We have to layer our expectations and perceptions over top of that, and then we have to try and ask the right side of the brain, please, can I have a little less pain in my back? It doesn't work very often when we just ask it nicely. But there are some methods, like I say, Hemisync. So how Hemisync works is quite simple. We have an audio range that our ears can detect. It's above 20 hertz and below 20,000. Anything outside that audible range, we don't hear. But our brains, they have different states. We have delta brainwave states, which is when we're in a deep sleep, and that's very low hertz. That's between 1 and 4 hertz, somewhere around there. And to bring about that state in our mind, or to bring about Hemisync, we can't stimulate ourselves with audible sensations because we won't hear it. So what we do, it's a little trick, I can't remember the name of it, but you put a 400 hertz signal into the right ear, which is a tone, and you put a 404 hertz, so 4 hertz difference, in the left ear. And what happens with the frequency following the response, or sympathetic resonance, which is something we've known for a long time, the hemispheres of the mind start to work together, and they start to decipher that 4 hertz difference between the two sounds. And you'll actually hear it. If you try the Hemisync, you'll hear this very slow, warbling wave hidden within the tone. And when our brains communicate to hear that sound, we've immediately brought about communication between the hemispheres. It takes both of them to do that.
Binaural beats.
That's another name for it, yes. Yes.
What is it?
Binaural beats is what people probably be more, I should have started with that one. People are probably more familiar with that. And so once we have that communication between both hemispheres, our brain then tries to modulate itself to be in sync with the world around us. It's what it's trying to do all the time. And once we're able to bring the brain down to that 4 hertz frequency, we can have an externally created deep meditation experience where we have a lot clearer access to that right side of the brain. We have a lot clearer access to our pleasure, pain responses. So that's a second method that we can bring about inner communication within ourselves. The third method I want to go into is called biofeedback. Has anyone heard of this one? Yeah. Biofeedback, it's quite amazing. I'll go through it for those who haven't heard. And I'll talk about some of the uses that it has. But the basic understanding of biofeedback is you have a thermometer, you place it on your left leg where you've had a bit of damage. You may have twisted your ankle or something like that. You want to increase the blood flow consciously into the left leg to help the healing process. Blood flow helps clear things out. So you put your thermometer on your left leg, and then you consciously, with your left mind, you try and force blood into that left leg. And we can do that anytime we like, but what the thermometer adds is a positive result. We now know when we've achieved that sensation. And once we see that change in the thermometer, once the temperature rises because there's more blood in the leg, we're able to remember what that felt like. Once we have a memory, we can recall that memory. We can re-trigger that same response. So after a few short weeks, people who have gone through this very simple training they can do in their own homes, they're able to hold their hand up and make it go pink. They're able to just push blood into it consciously from their left mind using that communication they've built between the hemispheres. It doesn't just stop there. You're actually able to turn pain off completely. This is what we've seen with people who have done extensive amounts of biofeedback. Twist their ankle, I don't want to feel that anymore, I'm going to turn that off. And they're able to do that. I think that's quite amazing. But how we're using it practically is with children with ADHD. Typically these children, we've all met them, they're very intelligent, they're very intelligent people, but typically performing at the bottom of their class. And we medicate them, we give them Class A substances that would put us in prison for 30 years if we took. But we give it to these children, and what happens? Bottom of the class. No change in a lot of cases. Some of them respond well, but not all the time. Biofeedback, however, is simple as modulating their own brain waves consciously. These children, within 4 weeks, go from bottom of the class to top of the class in almost every case. I don't think we should just be helping out the ADHD children. I think all children should have this kind of training. It's quite astounding what the results are. So that's 3 ways that through medical science, through widely accepted papers and research, we can actually achieve inner coherence. I haven't touched on any of the esoteric or the occult understandings of that. I understand we've had plenty of information this few days about that, so I'm trying to put that scientific spin on it. That's sort of where I am at. So I want to finish by just making a couple of other points that I feel to be important. We all know we're not separate from the world, we're part of the world. And I know we all have an understanding of vibration and how that plays a role in it. But I think scientifically we've limited ourselves. We see a year as being the big oscillation, the big vibration that affects us. It changes our seasons, it brings about life on this earth basically. And without that, life wouldn't exist. But we have oscillations that are longer than that affect us. We have oscillations that are shorter than that affect us. Our atoms are vibrating millions of times a second. And our sun is traveling around the center of our galaxy, which takes millions of years, massive cycle. We are all essentially, when we break ourselves down and look at ourselves through microscopes, we are all vibration. That's all we are. We're distilled energy in physical form. Vibration is what's allowing you to hear me, it's what's allowing you to see me, it's what's keeping you from falling through your chair. It's very important. It plays a role in everything. And I think that that's just a little tack on to the inner communication, because when we look at our physiology and how inner communication works, it always comes back down to vibration. Transcendental meditation is another one based on vibration. It's about the acoustic pressure created by our heart through our body. Very interesting. Does anyone have any questions on all the blabbing I've been doing?
What about a giraffe?
What about a giraffe?
It's got a long neck, and it's a long way to go from the brain right down to the. So this giraffe has a long way to go for the result of it.
That's a very difficult question to answer. Yeah. My research didn't cover giraffes, but I'll take a stab in the dark. I think that perhaps the animal kingdom, they're already more in tune with their bodies. I mean, they aren't in their left brain. They don't have a personality the same way that we do, and they probably don't have an inner narrative based on the fact they don't have language. So they would have to, from birth, most animals would have to be in communication with their hearts to be able to function, to be able to hunt their prey, find their grass and things like that. That's just my theory though, like I say, research didn't cover that topic. Hi. Yeah, that's something that's very interesting, that our current understanding of biology, or our understanding before we knew that there was a brain in the tail, it basically ruled out a lot of the big bones that we were finding, because our body couldn't be scaled up to that size and still operate the way that it does. So they found that second brain there because the way that their blood pumps, the way that oxygen moves around the body, wouldn't have supported their large frame without that second brain to help compensate. And on that topic, one of my favorite creatures is the cockroach. Purely because of, from an evolutionary standpoint, not that that's my thinking, they are perfect. They're almost unkillable. And one of the things that's fascinating to me about cockroaches is that the brain is distributed throughout the entire body. The part of the brain that does the walking is actually in the legs. So, you know, I'm sure you've all heard you can cut the head off a cockroach and it'll keep moving. That's because you've only cut a little bit of its brain out. So I find that very fascinating.
What happens? So you can't kill a cockroach?
Oh, you can kill a cockroach, most certainly, but they're hard to kill.
They're hard to kill.
But because their brain is everywhere in their body, not just in their head, removing the head doesn't stop them like it does for us. Yeah, again, I'm going to qualify, this is my theory, but the understanding is that the left controls the right and the right controls the left. So left-handed people, it may be again, my theory, they may be expressing from a more right-hand side of the brain, which is associated with creativity and intuition and all these other lovely things. Yeah, no, I think we can all benefit from integration, and part of the tragedy of modern day living is there's an enforced method of living, you know, how we fit into society and things like that, and it's actually really good at severing that connection, not building it up. We tend to focus on our left side of the brain too much and leave the right side by the wayside. There's other simple practices to help that connection if you're interested. Simply doing a figure eight with your thumb and watching it is passing signals between the left and right to continue that motion fluidly. You've got to watch it as well because the eyes are at play. Yeah, that is quite an interesting one as well. And we also look at the fact that there's a lot of science to support that inanimate matter has memory of sorts as well. And again, qualifying my theory, not research that I've done, but my theory there is that everything in our universe is containing another universe. We talk about the fractalized nature or the holographic universe. That's literally what that means. And if a universe is a single consciousness made up of individualized consciousnesses, then it would stand to reason that we have the ability to have a universal memory, a universal consciousness. And I think that each cell, each atom is its own universe with its own consciousness. We've even had cases where people have had heart transplants and adapted the personality from that other individual. And also going back to the gut brain, we're starting to branch out into this area of medicine called a fecal transplant. Sounds horrible. Is there a fecal transplant? Know what that is? Yeah. And we're finding that in mice specifically, because that's our easiest laboratory way of testing this, we can transfer personality aspects through fecal transplants. We can transfer healing abilities from one mouse to another. I think that the brain, the body, is full of consciousnesses that aren't this one that's narrating, and that they're all working together, and we quiet them down or we ignore them. But when things like the hemispherectomy occurs, we give it a voice. By severing it from the control of the left brain, we give that right brain its own voice. And in the cases of hemispherectomies, we get something we call alien hand syndrome. And these people who have had this, it's usually done for epilepsy, to treat epilepsy. Once they've had this hemispherectomy, they have a hand that does what it likes to do, not what the person wants it to do. So these people, and you can go online and have a look, these people will spend 10 minutes at a light switch, flicking it off and flicking it back on, because the other side of the brain doesn't want them to leave the room, and they need to turn the light off to go. And there's even been cases of people waking up in the middle of the night throttling themselves. The right-hand side of the brain has decided that that life needs to be ended, and it tries to do it while the other side's sleeping.
Not a good outcome, is it?
No, it's not good at all.
Is there a danger in it, playing with this?
As with the danger we have in any individual we meet, we don't know their wants or their needs or their intentions. I think that the right side of the brain, the left side of the brain, the heart, the gut, all these other discrete consciousnesses within us have their own intentions. And unless we can communicate with them and learn what they are and work with them for the benefit of the entire body, they may want to pull in other directions. And that's where that throttling comes from, I think.
Do you see an interface coming, between, say, artificial intelligence and, the human consciousness, or the left and right side of the brain, some interface between, when we're going between multiple dimensions or dimensioning and that sort of thing at all?
Yeah, so again, I say we, it's nothing to do with me, it's just stuff I've read. But we're looking at prosthetics directly interfacing with the brain. I'm sure we've all seen research on this, attaching to our nerve in our neck, or in the arm, or even sometimes directly into the brain. And we are branching into that area of technology now. My personal concern is that's where we're going. I don't think that's a very good way to go. Once you have technology interfacing with the brain, you have corporations having more control over the individuals. It's a terrifying idea. If you haven't seen a show called Black Mirror, I recommend that. It's a very good show because it kind of shows where these technologies could take us. It's of course fictional, but it's a good sort of mental exercise. It's a fear in that if it occurs, it would be terrifying. But I'm kind of in the belief right now that we aren't going to go that way. That hopefully we wake up a little bit before we get down that road too far. It is. Our bodies are directly affected by the world around us, our planetary system, and in a greater sense, the entire universe. The energies emanating from every corner of the universe, once they reach our body, have an effect on it. And we are in communication with it. It's just not consciously. I think to be able to understand it, to integrate it correctly, and to be able to avoid its ill effects, we need to understand it consciously. And me personally, I think that there's a lot of knowledge about that in the esoteric realm, but like I say, I'm a very left-sided kind of guy. I'm still waiting for some of that information to be quantifiable, detectable, and observable. So when we have that, I'll be very excited. But I'll still keep down the esoteric path as well, because I know that is also going to that same goal of interconnectedness.
Ben, is there some way we could protect ourselves from other energies?
Well, my friend Glenn, he found that using divining, he found that there was a water stream going under his home, and there have been studies conducted where running water passing underneath the body is actually electromagnetically pulling energy from that body. And one of the things that Glenn did, which remedied it quite well, is he set up in his home where this underground stream was running, he set up just a simple coil at each end, and just a coil of wire. And that coil of wire seemed to be quite effective. He's no longer able to detect the water in his home. There are lots of ways to protect the body.
I came across the idea that in the Middle Ages, when people chose a property and were deciding where to put the house, they would take dogs with them. And it was said that a dog will not lie down and sleep over running water, and it would indicate where not to build the home.
It's knowledge that we've had for a long time throughout history, and we just, with this massive surge of science, we just ignored all of that because we couldn't quantify it with our instruments. But now we're starting to relearn these things. Yeah, most certainly. The electromagnetic waves that are passing through our body right now, because all the radio stations we're not listening to, coming right through us. All the TV we're not watching, coming right through us. Everybody's cell phone communications coming right through us. And it does have an effect. Fortunately, our intentions, I think, have a stronger effect on our body. We can keep a close guard on our will and on our intentions of how we feel, and we're able to combat that internally with nothing more than our own minds. But it is something that, although it is having an effect on us, it doesn't appear to be so detrimental that we're falling like flies left, right, and centre. And there's a lot of, I won't go into too many conspiracies, but there's a lot more to that one. Yeah, there's a lot of, I don't want anyone to become concerned about this, because there are a lot of things that impact our minds, and in certain cases it can be linked that an iPad or so has caused these things, but there are esoteric teachings that talk about cancer and tumours having less to do with the world around us and our physiology, and more to do with our state of mind. I know this is probably an unpopular thought, but I personally believe that cancer is an opportunity, a tumour is an opportunity, because it usually represents a blockage in that person's ability to love. It's usually the result of a deep-seated hatred that somebody might have. And when that cancer comes about, in some cases, people have been able to remove that blockage through meditation and other workings, and the tumour just evaporates. So I think there's a lot of levels to things like that. Some of it may be electromagnetic, some of it may be to do with our internal energies and intentions.